So they control all the governments, they control the politicians, they control Congress, they control Senate. And if they want to assassinate someone, which is very topical at the moment, if they want to bribe someone, if they want to ruin someone's career, they have the ability to do that. The world has this facade of thinking that they live in democracies, when democracy is an absolute optical illusion to distract people into thinking my vote matters when it doesn't matter. I'll invest 1 trillion here if you allow us to have this military base taken away. And they'll say, okay, well, we need to control this water resource, and if you don't let us have X%, then we'll just bomb it and we'll get Israel to bomb it.
One of the ways I've tried to condense this is that when you track the physical movements of gold across the world, it very closely tracks the movements of power dynamics, or political power, as you were describing. Is gold still the primary geopolitical money of the world today? Like, whoever has the gold makes the rules.
One of the interesting things about what happened post 1971 is that America, when it privatized the creation of the dollar and then removed the constraint on the convertibility into gold, we entered into this new era where banks rule. So what happened with that?
Mr. Dixon, it's good to see you.
Good to see you again. Pretty wild times at the moment.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us from the other side of the pond.
Yeah, I'm here on my little island, seeking a little bit of sanctuary at the moment. It looks like the whole world's about to spark up anything right now. And it feels like it's very engineered as well. It feels like civil unrest seems to be the goal from somebody's agenda.
Yeah, peak divide and conquer moment is what it feels like. You feel the tension in the ethers. Yeah. And so you have a nice little safe sanctuary. Is there any thoughts on good places to go in the world to avoid the chaos? Would that just be inward? Get spiritually right with ourselves, or what?
I think so, but I do think we are having a global recollaboration. I do think that as we've entered into this multipolar world with a rising power with China and the world unifying around regional blocks, I do think tariffs really kicked off a reset. And the world seems to be moving into these blocks, whether it be the Gulf countries, GCC, whether it be BRICS, China, Russia, India, whether it be the ASEAN countries, and I think the collective West. And I do feel that the collective West has been fully colonized by a set of corporate interests. I call it the proof of weapons network. And the types of wars and various other activities that the West has covertly done around the world in order to acquire resources, I think it is coming back to the West. And so, yeah, I'm feeling like the Middle East, as volatile as it sounds right now, I think it's going to go through a decolonization phase and a growth phase. I think the global South is going to be okay. What you do during that transition, obviously Bitcoin is the haven, but then we live in the physical world as well. So I saw retreat in an island. I started planning about 10 years ago that I thought something like this might happen. Yeah, with that, we've got lots of different types of models, but I don't see the West turning around from here. I think it's moving to a regional power, and that's very different to having America as a global hegemon. And I think that's the source of a lot of volatility that we're experiencing right now.
So is that the shift to the multipolar world that a lot of people have been talking about? And you use the term proof of weapons network. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that. What is the proof of weapons network, and how does that play into the unfolding of the multipolar world?
Yeah, well, when I was a monetary reformer before I was a Bitcoiner. And I found Bitcoin because I was seeking a solution to fractional reserve banking. I tried to create a bank myself. And there was no way of creating a bank without engaging in the debt-based Ponzi scheme that fiat currency is. And so when you try and get a banking license, you sign up to either get an account directly. At the time I was applying with the Bank of England before Bitcoin was created, or whether you're doing it with the Federal Reserve. You basically sign up to be able to create money every time you issue a loan. The challenge is with each of those loans, it incurs interest, and the interest to repay that credit doesn't actually exist. And so by definition, ever since 1694, when the Brits created the system at the Bank of England, we've had this debt-based Ponzi scheme where in order to have money, you have to have more debt. And if you want less debt, you have to have less money. And the only way to continue the cycle is to have more debt. And so in trying to find ways of creating more money, i.e. creating more debt, you enter into this problematic environment that we have right now, which is you have individuals that borrow, and they either borrow to consume, in which case they end up on the wrong side of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, or they borrow in order to lever up and buy assets. And if those assets that they purchase end up, outperforming the inflation that's created from the new money that has to be created to pay off the old debt and recycle the scheme, you end up in an environment of warfare. I call it debt warfare. And so when the individuals take it on, it's also done at the corporate level. And you have this hyper securitization and financialization of companies, where you're selling them at Silicon Valley, you're trying to take them public. But if you can tap into the debt capital markets, you can borrow at very, very low interest rates if you have a good relationship with an investment banker, which is what I used to do by career. And you end up being able to hyper leverage the markets, buy back your stocks, manipulate stocks. They go completely out of whack from any type of economic activity. And you either get on the right side of that or you get on the wrong side. And then obviously the easiest way to get debt is at the government level. And so we had this post Bretton Woods World War II order that we're currently living in right now, where the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the dollar debt-based Ponzi scheme, which took over from the pound debt-based Ponzi scheme, has been essentially getting governments deep into debt by overthrowing governments, by installing central banks that are able to print alternative fiat currencies, and then using the IMF in order to enslave them in debt. And then you use this debt slavery to install dictators and all sorts of covert wars that we've been witnessing ever since the end of World War II, because you need to get the world deeper into debt. And then they take that money that they print and they lend it back to the US government through treasuries. And now we're at the stage where how many treasuries, there's $37 trillion in the US. And we're trying to figure out how to roll over another $7 trillion this year. But at the end of it, you reach the stage where unless you can roll over that debt, then we're going to have to enter into a new phase. And so the countries start hedging away from this environment where they've had to malinvest in their own country, lend it to the US government through treasuries, because the dollar is the currency that they have to save in through this proof of weapons network. And then that creates an environment where all countries in the world are lending to the US. The US government holds on to all of that debt. And internally, you have this K-shaped economy where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. based upon how close you are to being able to borrow at 0% from the central bank or access a bailout. But eventually, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer to such an extent that you reach a very polarizing environment where you have civil unrest, because those shafted by the system go to the extreme left, and those that have done well from the system continue to corrupt the system with their power, whether it be buying politicians through lobby, and just rigging the system in their gain through bailouts and various other things, until the whole economy benefits just a very small percentage of the population with all the assets, and those that are labored with all of the debts. Their cost of living crisis drives them to the type of environment that leads to civil unrest, and then an external power looks at that and says, right, time to reset the board. And so that's where it kind of the proof of weapons network is engineered into, is codified into fiat currency, that you would end up with a very unsustainable situation, because money is debt and there's not enough money to pay off the interest on the new debt.
Wow. Well said.
Yes.
Well said. Just this whole idea, I mean, it all starts with that oxymoron, right? That the money is not actually money, right? The money is debt.
When you have, when the British government got bankrupted, we entered into World War I, which was 1 year after we managed to create the Federal Reserve. There was multiple assassinations to ensure that a central bank wasn't created in America, because it had a local state banking system. But we managed to get these two central banks, and then the third central bank was implemented into US, and it was no coincidence that in 1913 you had the ADL created, which is a organization for censorship, which is being weaponized at the moment to censor people at the moment. You had the introduction of income tax, because prior to that it was taxed on tariffs. And then you had the dollar debt-based Ponzi scheme, and this Federal Reserve. Essentially, the shareholders are banks, and so after 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve, we entered into World War I. Wall Street funded both Nazi Germany. It funded the Industrial Revolution and the manufacturing base in America. And it also funded the Bolshevik Revolution, which was the overthrow of the Tsar in Russia, and then funded the creation of the Soviet Union and communism. So Wall Street essentially created and funded fascism, communism, and fake capitalism, which was capitalism backed by a debt-based Ponzi scheme, just like it did with the Bank of England. And so then the Federal Reserve set about taking all the colonial wars that the Bank of England created when it bankrupted the British government, and set about doing the same in America. And so you had the Cold War, then you had the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, you had all the covert wars, you had the battle for all the oil in the Middle East, and then eventually, once the Cold War was settled, profiting from both the Soviet Union and the fake capitalism of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, you kept rolling over the debt, rolling over the debt, rolling over the debt, until eventually you end up with bailing out the system, savings and loans crisis, global financial crisis, dot-com boom and bust bailout, long-term capital management, and then through to the pandemic and everything we've seen since then. But what you see is, anyway, the same process of what happened with the British Empire. And now you're at 125% debt to GDP, $37 trillion of debt, and realizing that the only way to fund and get more debt is to increase war. And so war is built into the proof of weapons network. It weaponizes the media by lying to everybody about what's really happening. It weaponizes retail banking by creating a debt-based Ponzi scheme. It weaponizes investment banking by turning everything into a security, a financial product, and now tokenization. It weaponizes fiat currency, even creating stable coins now. It weaponizes surveillance, which is, where we're moving to this AI 1984 surveillance utopia that has been beta tested in the UK, beta tested in Gaza, beta tested in Ukraine. All that technology that was beta tested is now coming back to the West, and is being a proposed solution to all these open borders, closed borders types of things. But the reason I call it a proof of weapons network is because everything is weaponized. Even civil unrest is weaponized. If you can create civil unrest, you come with the solution, which is Palantir's technology now. These kind of different types of things. So you can go in as detailed as you want, but I spent most of my life, the last 25 years, trying to understand this proof of weapons network. And after trying to create a bank that would exist outside the system, I was taken down by the Bank of England. Tried to even do it on an island, and the Bank of England once ended up at Bitcoin anyway. So that's when in 2011 spoke at the first Bitcoin conference, and then wrote a book around how Bitcoin would be weaponized, as a counterforce, as proof of work could be something that we could peacefully weaponize against the proof of weapons network. Just been watching the journey of how people have been able to. I'm not sure it's going to save as many people as is needed, but just dedicated my life to trying to get as many people to own their own money so that they have the ability to spend their own money, run their own nodes, hold it in cold storage, rather than give it to finance. And obviously, they benefit from the fact that by having a fixed money supply asset, you can outperform the proof of weapons network and become wealthy enough to actually even engage in lobbying if you want to engage in politics. But more importantly, just create your own sovereign, digital island outside of the system that can take you wherever you need to go once this system implodes on itself.
Wow. Yeah.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few keystrokes. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with zero lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with zero long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your energy bill for 1 week per mining rig when you sign up at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. And on top of this offer, you can also use code BREEDLOVE to get $100 off your first mining rig with Blockware Solutions.
Where do you think we're at with Bitcoin? Do you think there's enough people with Bitcoin and self-custody to have any sort of meaningful impact on this conundrum we find ourselves in?
I don't see any way of saving fiat currency. The end result of fiat currency is communism. And so you've got the slow socialist communist creep. I believe the future of the West is as a technocracy. There's no, the West has run out of places to cannibalize and colonize through, and so it's doing it on itself right now. And so I definitely don't think enough people own Bitcoin. I think it's still niche. And the challenge is that we've entered into this new phase of adoption, and the proof of weapons network has decided that it wants to get as many people to hold their Bitcoin with them. And so if you look at Operation Choke Point 2.0, I personally believe that that was an operation between the Federal Reserve, the asset managers like BlackRock, the SEC and the corrupt leadership, and the lobby that bought the Biden administration in order to choke the market so that it could install companies like Celsius and FTX and make the market look really, really bad, where BlackRock can suddenly come in and get an ETF approved, and the banks can suddenly come in and say, hey, we'll take out Silvergate, Signature, and Silicon Valley Bank that were servicing the crypto businesses, and then we'll find out how we have our own little solution. In Goldman Sachs, you can start doing some trading. JP Morgan, you can do some of this. Fidelity, Bank, BlackRock, you can all start doing that. And we'll persuade as many people as possible to put their Bitcoin in an ETF. And then the investment banks came along and said, hey, why don't we do strategy? Why don't we create this service where we can get as many companies as possible to put Bitcoin in the public markets? And then what we'll do is we'll get a company like Cantor Fitzgerald, who is a primary dealer connected to the Federal Reserve. We'll get him to create, or we'll create Cantor Fitzgerald to create a way for people to borrow against their Bitcoin. And then we can all issue fiat currency loans. And we've now got 17% of the Bitcoin supply in treasury companies, in ETFs, and then obviously Satoshi's coin and stuff. And they're going to lever the shit out of Bitcoin and try and persuade as many people to borrow against their Bitcoin. And I believe that they will scam a lot of people out of their Bitcoin. But their game now is we've got this two-tiered Bitcoin economy. And sadly, they engineer the system so that you want to use theirs. They make it where it's tax efficient to hold it in your retirement fund. And they make it easier for you to pass on inheritance. So a lot of people are falling for that trap. I think it's all part of leverage that they'll gain when we negotiate into this multipolar world. It's probably worth discussing a bit more about like power dynamics and structure, because I think a lot of people are very confused. A lot of people think that politicians are like in charge. They think that like by changing from the left to the right or Republican to Democrat, it actually makes a difference. What I discovered quite some time back is that when we introduced this system in 1913, the Federal Reserve, its shareholders were the regional central banks. And then the regional central banks were all owned by the private banks. Now, the private banks were able to create the dollar every time they issue a loan. And those private banks, which previously were owned by wealthy European families and, elites, whether it be the Rockefellers or the Morgans or the Warburgs. And by the way, the Warburgs, they were both on the board of the Bank for International Settlement and the Reichsbank, which funded Nazi Germany. And the brother was also on the board of the Federal Reserve. So you had this family that were both part of the communist Soviet Union, the fascist Nazi government, and the Federal Reserve. And they were all in the same families, funding every side of all the Cold War and everything else, and profiting from both sides. But if you look at what happened with the Bank for International Settlements, which was set up after World War I to manage the reparation payments from Nazi Germany, it was every time Hitler would invade a new country, it would just take the gold in the Bank for International Settlements, like at Czechoslovakia. As soon as the Nazi Germany would raid, it would just take that gold, which was held at the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. It didn't hold any of it. It just held the ledger. And it would transfer it over to the Nazi party. And so what you had is that the gold was held at the Federal Reserve, the Russian Central Bank, and the Bank of England. And by the end of World War I and World War II, all of the Nazi Germany gold ended up in around Fort Knox. All of the British Empire gold, which was, accumulated through opium wars and various atrocities, that all ended up at Fort Knox. And a massive chunk of the Russian Soviet Union gold all ended up at Fort Knox. So 75% of the world's gold, through this elaborate mechanism at the Bank for International Settlements, it would, every time Nazi Germany raided a new country, it would hand over the gold and just put a new title on top of the gold and change the label on the drawer and say, hey, Fed, that belongs to them, or hey, Bank of England, that belongs to them. And then eventually it all ended up in Fort Knox, and now obviously it's never been audited. And it says that Treasury has it, but actually the Federal Reserve has levered it up and it's on both balance sheets. And the Federal Reserve is a private company. So if you look at Treasury's balance sheet and Federal Reserve balance sheet, you've got this 8,200 tons of gold, which is called into question. And the Trump administration said he would audit, but I don't think he is going to audit. But it's really interesting because if you think about it, this change in power dynamics was all funded by war, access to weapons, military might. And then you could change the label of the gold. And because it was a custody at the central bank could determine who was going to win the war by who it would put the new label on the gold for. And so eventually it put everything in Fort Knox and said, we'll use the dollar. We'll persuade the whole world. We'll force the world to adopt dollars because we've got all the gold. And so they then said, hey, why don't you all trade your currencies against our currency and we'll back our currency by gold. And you can all, if anything goes wrong, don't worry. Trust me, bro. We got the gold. You can trade your currency for our dollars. And then if you don't like anything we're doing, you can trade it for gold. And so they set up the IMF for that purpose. So now you had the Bank for International Settlements, the IMF, and then the World Bank set about colonizing the world and getting them addicted to dollars. And then obviously when the French came along and pulled up a fleet to America and said, give me my gold, we entered into 1971 and the closing and saying, we're going to default. You can't change the dollar for gold anymore. And so we then entered into the hyper cycle that we're in right now, where there was no constraint on how many dollars can be created other than who was willing to borrow it. And so that's where we find ourselves in right now, because no one can convert those dollars to gold anymore.
Oh, man. That's, first of all, brilliant exposition.
Yeah.
told a similar story, but in much more succinct terms, and it helps a lot the way you unpack it that way. Is it one of the ways I've tried to condense this is that when you track the physical movements of gold across the world, it very closely tracks the movements of power dynamics or political power, as you were describing. Is that still the case? Like, so is gold still the primary geopolitical money of the world today? Like, whoever has the gold makes the rules, so to speak.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about what happened post 1971 is that America, when it privatized the creation of the dollar and then removed the constraint on the convertibility into gold, we entered into this new era where banks rule. And so what happened with that is the banks then created the investment banking division, which previously was, around about just making companies public. It did the 29 debt-based. It managed to lever up like crazy, get everyone into stocks, create a bubble, and then it burst the bubble, took America into the Great Depression of the 30s, confiscated all of America's gold, forced all the Americans to hand in their gold to rebuild this supply. It used its gold and its ability to leverage its gold to build its manufacturing base. And so the reason that America dominated is because it was providing the weapons to everybody. Germany had its own weapons, but once it didn't have access to its gold, it created an alternative system called National Socialism, which is where it essentially printed its own money to come out of the Weimar Republic, which wasn't backed by gold. It was actually backed by labor. And then he arrested the Rothschilds, and we ended up in World War II and all the atrocities from there. But America was really built upon its manufacturing base and its ability to manufacture those weapons. And so at the moment today, America dominates from technology, but has a competing power with China. But the reason that American technology dominates is because it created this privatization system. And in the privatization system, essentially the military, you'd have this system whereby there's always a justification. You have to scam the Americans into believing that they need to be at war by creating fear all the time. And then that justifies why they should print more money and increase the national debt. Then they take that money, just like the big, beautiful bill today that Trump did, and you have half of it that goes to military companies. Let's call it the military industrial complex. And so by essentially those that don't own shares pay the inflation and go deeper into debt on the wrong side of the K-shaped economy. Those that own the shares benefit from the fact that essentially money is being taken from the taxpayer or the person that doesn't have assets that pays the inflation. And through this crony capitalist system, through Pentagon budgets, it ends up back in Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon, now Palantir and various other companies. And so you have this very sophisticated system for laundering money into these corporations and these companies. And what the investment banks did is it securitized everything. So it took the mantra of free market capitalism, which, by the way, requires hard money. Free market capitalism doesn't work without hard money. You're now in Keynesian economics, which is not free market capitalism. And so what it did is it created this very sophisticated way of siphoning off all the wealth into the stock market. And so you have the bond market, which is the mechanism for getting the government excessively into debt. Now the Federal Reserve owns $10 trillion of debt, pays a 6% dividends to its shareholders, which is the banks. They get to create all the dollars every time they issue a loan. And then those companies went public. And so by being public companies, they're now on the stock market, which gives them access to the corporate debt. And so you can take the corporate debt, you can back it by the government's debt. And then anytime you need more, if you take too much risk, you go back to the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve bails out the system. Then the Federal Reserve owns that debt, and it's now got about $2 trillion of mortgage-backed securities, $8 trillion of government debt, pays a dividend back to the shareholders. And even now in the Genius Act, they're able to take those reserves and create a stable coin with them. That was lobbied into the Genius Act. But anyway, the investment bank essentially securitized everything. Now, what securitization does is it means that whoever ends up with all the shares controls the economy. And so if you look at what they created, so you have this system where the government takes on the debt, the money goes back to the corporate through crony capitalism, through lobbying and various other things. And then that pushes up the share price. And then you just keep repeating this cycle of the theft of all the assets over to those that are able to control the assets. So you've got the creation of the dollar with the retail bank. You've got the creation of securities with the investment bank. You've got the guarantee of the system with the private central bank. You've got the debt capital markets, the equity capital markets. And then what they did is they created another industry, which was the asset manager. So they persuaded every American to say, hey, this is too complicated. I'll manage your pension. Hey, universities, you charge $100,000, get loads of students in debt. We'll lobby to change the curriculum to serve our corporate interest, whether that be big pharma or whatever. And then all of that, they'll have large endowment funds, and we can launder money that lobbies politicians, buys the politicians. Politicians are just prostitutes now, like for lobby interest. And we'll re-engineer all the legal system how we want it for us. And by managing every money, all the insurance premiums, all the pension fund money, all the endowment funds, we'll pull all that money together and create the asset management industry. And those asset managers are now dominated by four main players: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity. And so what they do with that is they put board seats on every single public company. And then they also created technology. They were very early. BlackRock was very early in artificial intelligence. It created something called Aladdin. And Aladdin was actually used by the Federal Reserve in determining which companies to take down and which companies to give bailout loans to. And of course, it helped BlackRock. They acquired the largest ETF company, Barclays iShares. And by having all of these ETFs, what they did is they created a mechanism whereby nobody could be bothered to figure out what stock to buy or have the voting right. You hand the voting right over to the asset manager. So now you've got BlackRock that owns all the voting rights in 20,000 of the largest companies in the world, installs the board seats, and has the artificial intelligence technology that all the asset managers, the Federal Reserve is using, and Treasury. Treasury during the pandemic decided how to allocate that money using BlackRock's Aladdin AI technology. So you got all the asset managers using BlackRock's technology. You've got all of the board seats, the majority shares in all of the companies, Treasury, and Federal Reserve. And what happened to those banks? Well, those banks went public. So JP Morgan, the largest shareholder, is BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. So you then look across, you've got this whole financial industrial complex, military industrial complex, technical industrial complex, consumption industrial complex, Amazon, all these different companies. And they've all got the same largest shareholder. And they've all got a board installed by one company. So BlackRock today is essentially the British East India Company of the British Empire and the Dutch East India Company of the Dutch Empire. And so the reason I say this is because the asset managers sit on top of this chain. Now, when they own shares in all of the major tech companies, all of the major pharmaceutical companies, all of the major military companies, all of the major banks and financial institutions, and what sits underneath the military industrial complex, it's the deep state, what we call the deep state. So within Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, they contract the CIA, and 90% of the CIA's resources work for corporate interest. So if they need more resources, they buy the politicians, they install the politicians, and essentially every Congress member has to answer to their funder, their lobby. And so you've created this mechanism which looks like democracy. Everyone argues over Republican and Democrat, but actually they all work for the same lobby, the same interests. And we've actually hit peak centralization through the Federal Reserve System. And now you could say that the top of this proof of the network, let's call it the CEO, is BlackRock. And that's where we are today. And so if you want to engineer war, you have access to the CIA, you have access to covert warfare, and you have the ability to lobby the governments to give you the budget. And now the dollar is just a weapon used by this proof of weapons network against the American people. And it controls England, Europe. Why do you think the European Union was created? It was created from the Bank for International Settlements. The European Union, unelected body that essentially persuaded everyone to get rid of their currency, and now they're mercy to the European Central Bank and the European Union. And so this is why you're getting across the whole of the West, from Israel to Australia to Canada to America to Britain to Europe. They all work for the same corporation. So right now, BlackRock is meeting Keir Starmer and asset stripping water, all of the different resources that it needs to build their AI data centers for Palantir and the Magnificent Seven companies. And that's where we found ourselves today. So the reason there's problems is that we have created this monster. Now, here's the thing. This proof of weapons network, it is governments are subordinate to it. So they control all the governments. They control the politicians. They control Congress. They control Senate. And if they want to assassinate someone, which is very topical at the moment, if they want to bribe someone, if they want to ruin someone's career, they have the ability to do that. But the world has this facade of thinking that they live in democracies when democracy is an absolute optical illusion to distract people into thinking all you need to do is change a politician and my vote matters, when it doesn't matter. You have to be wealth. The only people that control this system is those that own shares in BlackRock and these companies, and that's why we've entered into this world where government, there is no America first agenda, there is no Britain first agenda. There's just a BlackRock first agenda, and it manages the portfolio of this corporate interest. And that's what I call the proof of weapons network, which is why I love Bitcoin, and why as soon as BlackRock engineered Operation Choke Point 2.0, I took it upon myself to try and stop people borrowing against their Bitcoin, holding ETFs. And treasury companies is such a psyop. Like, strategy is going to end up with over 1 million Bitcoin, and it won't be nationalized. But clearly, once you are as important as Michael Saylor, you are an asset for the proof of weapons network. Like, there's no avoiding that. Trump is an asset. Keir Starmer is an asset. Macron's an asset. Whatever, Elon Musk is an asset. If you look at even all the corporations, like, just look at any of these technical companies. All their technology was created by the military industrial complex. And then the investment bank gave these, oh, you can be an entrepreneur and pretend you created all this stuff. But you got to bow down to our agenda, which is Elon Musk and various other entrepreneurs. You have these fake entrepreneurs that were given all the technology, and it was stolen from American money, handed over to a company, and then you have to give all these back doors to the NSA, the deep state, so that essentially you privatized and financialized all of the national security apparatus. and they control the game. Governments are just absolute patsies at this stage for printing money, giving everyone a narrative that they think that, MAGA is a narrative to make people think that Trump's going to make America great again. But who are his biggest funders? Miriam Edelstein from Israel, the Bank of Mellon family, and Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is just a tool for the military industrial complex. That's why he's creating regime change after regime change through X. He's overthrown the government in Venezuela, Brazil, UK, Europe, Germany, creating civil unrest in America. And I'm not. This is not a judgment on his character. He is owned by this mafia network, and it is a mafia. If you look back at when it was created, you go right back to World War II, Operation Paperclip. You had what happened to all the Nazis. The Nazis were integrated into the CIA. You had the formation of the CIA. That was a partnership with the Italian mafia and the Jewish mafia. And then you had those three forces that formed the CIA and created this covert network that was funded through human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and covert wars. And has created this slush fund via the Vatican Bank, which launders all these psyops. And the politician is just there to give you a narrative. So when Trump says, yeah, we're coming after the drug cartels, no, that's the CIA. That's not Venezuela. Venezuela has a partnership with Chevron, and Guyana has the largest oil reserves, the founder of the century. And Chevron and Exxon need that, and you need to go and get some rare earth minerals. And so all of these wars are fought for corporate interests to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And now we've entered into a multipolar world order. That changes everything. You used to have to bow down to the dollar. And if you didn't bow down to the dollar, you were assassinated, overthrown, replaced by a dictator. Your country was destroyed. Now you can work with China. And that creates a problem. And now Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, they've got sovereign wealth. And America has nothing but debt. And so we're going through these resource resets because we're in a multipolar world. Like the sanctions no longer work. Iran, China, Russia, they've got a network, and India's joined that network for trading no matter what the dollar says. Saudi Arabia reduced the petrodollar from 100% dollars to 70% dollars, and now is managing an exit of the US colonial military bases. And that's what we're witnessing all around the world right now, in Russia, Ukraine, and all these other things. So it is a real. We're living through absolute history, and we're just patsies at the front, listening to the media while they completely lie to us. And to me, the ultimate tool is to boycott the Federal Reserve by owning Bitcoin, having an asset that will outperform every fund manager, every stock, every bond, potentially gold. Gold's doing very well at the moment. Every commodity. Boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody. Boycott the banks by not borrowing fiat currency against it. And boycott the proof of weapons network corporations by spending local and investing in decentralized infrastructure. And so that's what I try and encourage everybody to do, because the only vote that matters is your money. And you have to have money that beats the system. And Bitcoin is that money, but only if you don't give it to them. Don't own it through an ETF. You're making them more powerful. You need to own it in self-custody. You need to run a node. And we need to fight back. And we need to become wealthy, because we got to rebuy the politicians. I have very little faith that we'll beat the system, but we have got a two-tiered system, and you can exit. And I want more people in there. And that's all I know how to do.
Fantastic.
Oh, man.
You've hit on so many things that I've tried to share before, but you elaborate on it so much better. So thank you for doing that. Bitcoin custody is evolving. OnRamp is pioneering a new model, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure and adds fault tolerance to your setup. With OnRamp's multi-institution custody, your funds are auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only be moved with your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody simplifies private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. OnRamp also helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, loans, and more, all without compromising on accessibility. So schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team today to learn more at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Politicians as puppets, right? I like that quote that fiat politics is the entertainment division of the military industrial complex. You know, like I get so wrapped around the axle when people want to engage in political debates and commentary, like their vote matters, like their opinion matters, like their favorite politician's agenda or policy or opinion matters. Like it's all bullshit. And it really frustrates me that more people don't see through it. We know that money makes the world go round, right? What's the infamous quote, give me the power to issue a nation's currency and I care not who makes its laws. And we just are seeing that writ large at scale. So this word, and I hesitate to go here because I truly believe, so I guess I should conditionalize this by saying, I think the only actual isms in the world are individualism or collectivism. I like to refer to collectivism as coercivism because it requires coercion to operate in any form. However, I want to ask, because the way you were describing that sounded like a deep alignment between corporate power and state power, which is traditionally known as fascism, if I'm not mistaken. Are we saying that fiat currency is the root cause of all of this global fascism, if that is the right term, that we're seeing unfold in the world? And how do we get people out of that political layer, left versus right, believing in the puppet show, and to abstract or transcend their perspective to be able to see the puppet masters?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I'm not sure I've got the full answer, because I do think that there is a spiritual war, and that's beyond the scope of religious, whatever conversation, spiritual belief. I do believe that is a layer above monetary. But I do believe in these spiritual, if you look at ancient scriptures, Jesus Christ threw out the usurers because he knew the problem with usury. In Islamic finance, it knew that there is fundamentally a problem in interest, in riba. Even in Jewish scriptures, it said we can't lend to each other at interest, but we can lend to others. And so there is something in the monetary system that takes us, I think, down a darker path. And the monetary system is rigged to fail. But I also do believe that, so firstly, China's not communism and America's not capitalism. That's the first thing to figure out. The second thing to figure out is the same lobby that controls politicians is the same lobby that controls the curriculum at universities and colleges. And so what you know at college was part of an agenda. The psychopathic alleged pedophile John Maynard Keynes that came from the British Empire in order to create the Bretton Woods system originally wanted one global currency called Bancor, but instead ended up as the dollar system and everybody trading against dollars, and America agreeing to convert those dollars into gold. But the economic theories were written in order by the same people that wanted to create a bunch of investment bankers and central bankers that understood their definition of economics. And so we had, prior to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, you had sociology and ethics that were involved in, there wasn't a word for economics, but it was always factored into the equation of spiritual belief, as well as sociology, what's good for society. But then it forked off into economics. And then in the Wealth of Nations, it was actually written by Adam Smith from much of the free trade and hard money Islamic economics, but it wasn't called economics. It's called sociology and different sciences. But what Adam Smith did is it took out all the ethics and said money is a group of self-interested people and you maximize your own utility with no consideration of anybody else or what's right for society. And if you have a bunch of people that maximize their own self-interest, then he has this thing's called an invisible hand, a free market, which directs the flow. But it needs hard money. And so the Islamic economics had hard money, ethics, and free trade. What we did when we went over to classical economics was we took out ethics and we took out hard money. And then when we went into the post-World War II Bretton Woods era, we codified usury based upon the Bank of England experiment. And we took out hard money because we removed the gold standard. So then you have the worst of all worlds. So I do believe that money is important and it can drive everyone in a certain behavior and direction when you create a scarce game and a Ponzi scheme. But I do think there's layers above it. I don't think money's the whole thing. I don't think Bitcoin, some people see Bitcoin as divine. Like, some people actually see it as God or Jesus or something. I don't put that in. I think it is a technology. I think it was, but the reason I say that is because John Maynard Keynes then iterated and said, hey, we need, if you want to stimulate your economy after this Great Depression and in the post-World War era, it said governments need to take on debt. And guess who provided the debt? The World Bank and the IMF. And so they created an economic model that said, if you want to get to full employment, the government has to step in hard times. The other half of Keynesian economics was you need to pay down your debt in the good times. And because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme, that doesn't work. And so you ended up with Keynesianism, and then Milton Friedman came along and said, here's monetarism. And they said, well, actually, you need to have a 2% systemic inflation. And you need to leave it to the free market. And what did the free market do? It created the hyper-financialization and securitization. And so now you ended up where the investment banks own everything, the private banks own everything, and it took these economic theories and trained a bunch of muppets to work at these banks and do the grad schemes and work at these central banks. And now those algorithms determine our monetary policy. And guess what? Economics was never solved. Like, if you study economics, which I did, these things are debates. And I personally believe it was the pre-Wealth of Nations models that were right. Ethics, hard money, and free markets. But we've ended up with a debt-based Ponzi scheme with no hard money. zero ethics, ruthlessness, like ruthlessness. The murders that are happening around the world, I would say between the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve, I would put an estimate that 200 million deaths have occurred in order to extract resources through wars that never needed to happen, that were made purely for profit and financialization. 100 wars since 100 covert wars. South America, Latin America, Middle East, Asia Pacific, China, Japan, like every country. You've had all these wars and wars and wars. That was all just to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. It didn't need to happen. And so I do think that money is important. I do think that competition is highly important. When you had the removal of the gold standard and the fall of the Soviet Union, you had NATO expansion. And that brings us to where we are today. And NATO is just simply a mechanism for getting Europeans, Brits, and Americans to justify money printing to give to Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon, BlackRock, and Palantir. And then the CIA escalates wars that never need to happen, and then use that in order to steal resources so that Elon Musk can get the magnets he needs for his batteries, and we can get the rare earth minerals that are needed for our iPhones. And you look at all these different militia groups around the world, whether it be Al-Qaeda, they're all funded by Western intelligence. M23, M13, anywhere you see ISIS, that's Western-funded militia that are there to completely topple a country like Congo via Rwanda so that it can steal resources that end up in our iPhone. Like, that doesn't need to be that way. Now, in multipolarity, because there is now competition, China's coming along and say, and look, I'm not a fan of China. I lived in Hong Kong for a bit, for like 5 years, but I wouldn't want to live in China. But the model that China is following is, it said, rather than IMF destroying countries and not allowing them to compete, we've got a manufacturing base and we want to sell product to them. So we'll invest in you and lend money to you so that you can buy our products and become wealthier. So a lot of people are choosing the Belt and Road Initiative over the IMF. Other countries like El Salvador are saying, all right, I got some IMF, I got some China Belt and Road Initiative, but I'm going to build my Bitcoin strategic reserves and see if we can build independent sovereign wealth using Bitcoin. But unfortunately, it didn't build enough Bitcoin, and the IMF won. They're still trying to interfere in the Bitcoin policy because it didn't. Bukele didn't have enough Bitcoin to fight the IMF, and so you have all these different types of models. But I would say, yeah, money is an absolute deception in its current format. China's not communism and America's not capitalism, and it is going to cause civil unrest. But there are countries that still are sovereign. So China's sovereign. There is no corporation or proof of weapons network above the CCP. In Russia, the same. The reason that Putin is the enemy of the West is because after the fall of the Soviet Union, the investment banks came in and tried to steal all the resources. And Putin nationalized the resources and said, don't touch it. And so then he became the next Hitler from Western narrative. Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Norway has a large sovereign wealth fund in the European region. But anyone that has sovereign wealth right now and not a Western central bank, and Western central bank, there's about 150 of them. They're all shareholders in the Bank for International Settlements. And then obviously the Federal Reserve in the US has proxy vote as the current empire. That is where, there is that battle. And so what is China doing? China's accumulating gold at a faster rate. So gold does still have a role. And I don't think Bitcoin has a role yet, but we as Bitcoiners know that it solves the problem of how do you store it, securely, transparently, send it easily at scale. And in these areas where now regional blocks are forming, whether it be BRICS, whether it be GCC, whether it be ASEAN, Bitcoin is the perfect mechanism for achieving that. So I actually think that Bitcoin, in the currency war ahead, and I'm predicting a big currency war. There is a currency war already with de-dollarization. I think Bitcoin's going to play a role, and gold absolutely plays a role. Central banks are reducing their dollar reserves as fast as they can accumulate gold right now. And he who owns the gold will have a seat at the table in negotiating, the next world order.
If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin changes everything. For those of us that get it, it is important that we use a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have recently pioneered the concept of roundups, which lets you turn your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your payment cards and all your purchases will be rounded up to the nearest dollar, letting you stack sats without even thinking about it. My favorite feature is Coinbits Plus. For $10 a month, you get the best spreads on Bitcoin, which lets power users save on fees and buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means you can do almost anything you want to do with Bitcoin using Coinbits. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that's coinbits.app, coinbits.app/breedlove. So there's a very special place called the Farm at Okefenokee. It's a 1,000-acre regenerative farm community about 45 minutes northwest of Jacksonville, Florida. The farm is a completely off-grid community. It has total food, water, and energy independence. Everything on the farm is 100% organic, and it even features wild boar and bear hunting. The farm at Okefenokee is right next to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, where you can do camping and canoeing tours. So if you're like me and you're interested in the self-sovereign lifestyle, then you can get your own lot on the farm at Okefenokee if you tell them that I sent you. Once you get a lot, you can build one of 3 custom cabin options. So if you value freedom, self-sovereignty, and living in touch with nature, then join me and my family. We have lot number 21, and we're going to be building a cabin there starting December 2025. To learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and make sure to tell them that I sent you.
Oh, I feel blackpilled. Holy shit, I don't know if I've felt so discouraged in many, many years.
Oh man. Well, I always wrestle with this too, that it seems to me that there's a lot to be pessimistic about in the present. But then
I'd say pessimistic in the West because the fall of a region is the rise of another region. If we think about this, the global South has been oppressed by the IMF. Unfortunately, Venezuela is not going to get anyone that's in America's neighbor is not going to get away. Europe is being sacrificed. UK is being sacrificed. Venezuela, Central America, Latin America, they're being sacrificed. Probably Canada and Mexico. America will be a regional power, and that regional power is controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network because they own all those shares, as I said. And it is cannibalizing its own people at the moment. But with the rise of competing powers, I think the Middle East is going to be, for the first time in 100 years, peaceful. That all of the war that we're seeing right now is completely changing the game in a way we've never seen before. So Middle East is actually going to be sovereign because it's partnered with China and BRICS. I do think for the first time in 1,000 years, Africa might be able to actually use its own resources. It's had 1,000 years of not being able to use its resources. It's just been a playground for corrupt politicians and Western consumption. So there is rising powers. And I do think that it is a reset, as it were, and people need to make their decisions. But I have very little faith that the West can do what it's done to the world for so long and not have problems ahead. And that's why people need Bitcoin in the West.
Yeah, so amen to that. I want to ask, because that was two rather bold predictions you had there, right? That there would be peace in the Middle East. I would love to hear how the calculus used to draw that conclusion, and that perhaps Africa could be its own sovereign power going forward. What is driving these changes? Is this all technological, like with the shift from the unipolar to the multipolar? Like, how is it that, well, if you just focus on those two.
It's all China. It's 100% China. So what happened is when the West got fully controlled by the investment banks and hyper-financialized, many people started buying American assets and European assets. So, these large sovereign wealth funds that had access to their own resources, they never securitized their oil. And so they built massive sovereign wealth. And China built the manufacturing base. And what the proof of weapons network did is it started, if you look at the word BRICS, if you don't know where it came from Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs came up with the idea of BRICS. And the proof of weapons network is invested globally. It's a globalist, if you want to come up with a term. Its members are in the World Economic Forum. They meet at Bilderberg meetings. They're members of United Nations. They have sustainable development goals. They create ESG policies. They're the ones that created the immigration open borders and then closed the borders by installing Trump. And then created the environment where you can have Palantir, the privatized, so Corsiva, GEO, Palantir, these are all the privatized the prison sector that profits from every person that goes into prison, profits from every deportation, and profits from the surveillance state. Those companies together, they're all obviously underneath BlackRock as well. And you have the Peter Thiels and Elon Musks that are able to usher through these different things. But the West is controlled by them. Now, what's happening in the Middle East is obviously the Middle East was colonized by the British Empire, the French Empire, Imperial Soviet Union, and then America just used it as its playground. America needed oil. It's now oil independent. When it invented fracking, it managed to become oil independent. But it needed oil from the Middle East, and it created war after war after war. The whole thing between Iran and Israel. So Israel was a colony of the British Empire. And then when the British Empire handed over its colony to the IMF and the American Empire, and we had this neo-financialized empire that we have today through the IMF and Fed and the Proof of Weapons Network. Israel was there to create a destabilizing force in the region. And then Iran was there in order to create a competing force. And if you read something, there's a book called Operation Gladio by Paul Williams. It explains how there's this strategy of strategic tension where America would fund both sides, or the Proof of Weapons Network would fund both sides. And then if you have two enemies like Iran and Israel, then you can throw the region into war forever. And you can just make sure there's no competing force that can unify around their resources. And so what's happened now is that China came along and said, right, we've got the manufacturing base. We've got a competing economy now. We don't have a Western central bank. We got a state banking system like America used to have. We have no proof of weapons network that sits above the CCP. And we've got, some people estimate 22,000 tons of gold, $3 trillion of reserves, selling its US treasuries, only about 700 billion left, I think. It basically came along and said, right, we need to protect ourselves from selling goods to America. So we're going to create this Belt and Road Initiative and build up everywhere. And so it started investing in Africa and allowing it to compete with the IMF. It started investing in the Middle East. And now China is Saudi Arabia's largest customer. Now, Trump, when he goes to the Middle East, he says, give me trillions of dollars. And so what you're seeing right now is that Saudi Arabia, whose most important customer is China, is buying American assets. And what was the model of the IMF? What was the neo-colonial model? What was the mercantile model? It was use financials in order to control stocks, shares, and resources. And so America sold off all its assets. And the investment bank, the Proof of Weapons Network, BlackRock, where did it set up its office? It set up its next office in Saudi Arabia. It started resetting the world into this multipolar world. I personally believe the tariff policy wasn't Trump's policy. It was Larry Fink's policy. And it was to drive everyone to China and make America a regional technocracy. So button up your regional, you're not controlling over there anymore. And so I think October the 7th was a false flag operation. That operation was to slowly manage the divorce between America and Israel, make it look like that's not happening, but essentially it's vassalized Israel into a toxic asset that now the GCC owns and controls, so that America can slowly retreat, but remain its MAGA narrative that it needs as we enter into this world. Why? Because China sat down with Saudi Arabia and Iran and normalized them. And ever since they normalized, they've stopped backing the resistance movements. America's still telling you that they're backing them. They're not. They retreated a long time ago, started negotiating a nuclear deal. And now the sovereign wealth of UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia is buying the exit of America, saying, we'll buy your assets, but you need to manage a transition out of the region. We want to be our own region now. And the change was China managed to normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iran and Saudi Arabia, while enemies, negotiating in sync. And Egypt didn't allow for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And the GCC is now negotiated. And Israel is going to have to become not a colony for creating war for American profits, because Netanyahu works for the US military industrial complex, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic. When you follow the money, it was there for military profits to destroy the region. Now they're going to have to be a normal state under the management of the GCC, and America's going to have to slowly retreat. And that's what I think we're witnessing right now. And so there is a controlled operations to manufacture the narrative for how to do this without America looking weak. And Trump will get the Nobel Peace Prize for the Abraham Accords and the peace agreement, but it was China that did it. It was Xi Jinping. But obviously Trump will take credit for it.
If you're a Bitcoiner, you need the Orange Pill app. It's where you can connect with other sovereign individuals locally and globally. It's great for when you travel, to meet local Bitcoiners, to go to Bitcoin meetups, and to find local merchants that accept sats. No distractions, no noise, just real Bitcoiners. So download the Orange Pill app today and find your local Bitcoin tribe.
Oh my goodness.
Wait, so, all right. Well, what about Africa then? How does Africa rise? And this is also China.
So Africa is now, for the first time, started purchasing and doing deals with BRICS. And they're working as a bloc. And China much of its rare earth minerals come from Africa. But what the Belt and Road Initiative doing is saying, we won't do your IMF deal. We won't create a deal where you give us the resources, you get nothing. We pay a dictator to be corrupt and steal the resources, and then you steal them and send them to us, and then we put them in Apple phones and the Magnificent Seven tech companies. What China's doing is saying, we'll invest in you building your own manufacturing base. We'll allow you to extract your resources and refine your resources and build product using our inputs. And we'll have a partnership with you that allows you to actually use your resources for your population. And you don't need to buy bonds. You don't need to install a central bank. And we won't dictate what type of model you have to have. We won't say you have to have a neoliberal democracy. And so Africa is now got the opportunity to use their resources, partner with BRICS. And so you've got these areas like Sudan and Libya that are the final battles. UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are funding some of the militia there. And then there's still the Western militias that are being funded by the West, like M13, M26, ISIS, Al Qaeda, all these various other ones. But they're being fought back. So Burkina Faso is the first region that actually managed to execute this. And now Niger has expelled the US and the IMF colonialists. Chad has done the same. And now the Belt and Road Initiative is proving not to be as predatory as the IMF. And so for the first time in 1,000 years, they might be able to actually use their resources to educate their people, build a manufacturing base, rather than being slaves for Western consumption.
I just wanted to share one thing. My grandfather told me when I was a kid and I didn't understand it. And he's like, son, I just want you to remember this. You'll understand, you can think more about it one day. He said he thought that China was going to take over the world without ever firing a bullet. And I just couldn't stop thinking about that as you were describing all that.
Yeah, again, I don't want to sound like a China propagandist. It's an authoritarian country. Human rights are violated frequently. I have issues with like the re-education camps of the Uyghurs. So I don't want to. The things you're told about China. So I don't want to be a China propagandist. But I can tell you culturally, where did China come from? It came from the century of humiliation, opium wars, raping, pillaging, death, destruction. And after that century of humiliation, it is culturally in their psyche. And they said, they built the Great Wall of China to keep the barbarians out, not to colonize the world. And so China, for all I can see, it is not doing the Western covert war model. I think the world's going to be a better place under multipolarity because I believe in competition. And as much as I've enjoyed living in the West, I think we're paying for what we ignored. And I had to relearn all of our history because we were brainwashed into a cartoon version of we were the good people and everyone else were the bad people. And there are a lot of bad people in the world, believe me. I'm not saying that, but nobody has been as brutal as the European, the British, and the American Empire. And it has been lies, deceit, death. What we are witnessing in Gaza right now, I've been watching it every day for 2 years. The brutality we've actually been doing the entire time. I put it to you, we never exited World War One. We've been in a continual state of war ever since. And none of it was necessary, but it's because of this proof of weapons network that backed the dollar and the pound by a debt-based Ponzi scheme and a central banking system that perpetually needed mercantile, colonial exploitation in order to build this hegemonic power that now has competition. And so I'm actually it is actually a message of positivity. The positivity is that the world's going to be, I think, a bit fairer. And I think the next empire is going to be less brutal, even though they are authoritarian by nature in their own country. They don't tend to tell other countries how to run themselves, and they don't build based upon destroying competition. The American and British Empire was all about destroying competition and not allowing any power to compete. And when the Soviet Union fell and America went to the global hegemon after coming off the gold standard in 1971, it has created something that we all need to pay for. So I do think we come out in a better place, but we've also got this technology, like this artificial intelligence thing. That's another force. Like, and Bitcoin itself, like the real battle of the future is, I believe, centralization versus decentralization in the end. Like, I'm not sure even if the next empire is going to survive long, because it seems like we're entering into a stateless technocracy. We've got all of that to go through. And what's happening to everyone's jobs in this environment? Like, we are alive at a time when if you don't own Bitcoin, and if you don't like Bitcoin Gold, whatever you want to do, like, I don't know. I don't have another answer, because there will be people that own Bitcoin and people that don't own Bitcoin, people that own gold and people that don't own gold, because artificial intelligence seems like it's going to change everything. And I do think that's why we're moving to this very strange world, and we're all going to navigate it together. Like, there are several changes all happening all in one go. But I do tend to agree that we will be propagandized in terms of what China's doing. And what was the justification for all these wars? Communism. We need to fight back against communism. We need to fight back against terrorism. And those were all manufactured. Both communism and terrorism was 100% manufactured by the West. There would be no terrorism if we hadn't funded militias, we hadn't invaded countries, and we hadn't created crimes against humanity that Julian Assange needed to reveal to us on WikiLeaks, that only managed to share the message to us because when the bank shut down WikiLeaks, it was only Bitcoin that allowed it to raise the funding that it needed to teach us what we did in these wars. Like, if you're watching Gaza, that's probably 100 to 600,000 deaths by the time we're done. We did 1 million in Iraq, civilians. Like, we were brutal. And now we get to see it on video. And Bitcoin gives me, that hope. And I do think that if we can box America into a regional power, I think the rest of the world is going to be slightly different. But absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there's still a centralized and decentralized battle to be had.
Yeah.
Wow. Is it possible that, or what kind of unexpected turn of events could potentially happen that could stop the foreseeable, seemingly probable carnage that's in front of us, if any?
Well, actually, I think we avoided World War III. That's a good thing. Because Russia, Iran, and China, and India and BRICS and South Africa and Brazil and various others, because they managed to create that environment of a competing hegemon, I call it the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network now. It was on full force in display at the Shanghai Corporation Organization a couple of weeks ago. AI, technology, financial rails, military, and it's all defense. I don't believe it's an attack, famous last words. But I don't believe it's based, I actually believe it's genuinely based upon defense. But I think we avoided World War III. And that was because there were this unification of regional blocks made it where the proof of weapons network that controls all military profits in the West, it was more profitable. The way that it tends to work is if you're negotiating with America, so say you're the Gulf Cooperation Council and you're negotiating with America, they'll say, all right, what's it going to cost us for you to stop the forever war? And they'll say, no, the forever war makes us, we've made $10 trillion of revenue over the last few decades, and we got no competition here. You've never been managed to unify around your oil resources. We're the global hegemon. No thanks. There's nothing. We'll keep bombing. We'll keep finding a new reason to manufacture a war. Even Afghanistan, that was just about protecting the drugs industry for America by the CIA. But what you're negotiating is you're basically saying, in order for the military to stop making profits from this forever war, they need to make 10 times more out of the rebuild. And so the reason the US colony of Israel is destroying Gaza is because they're leveling it because they're going to rebuild. And you can see Tony Blair submitted the plan. They're going to tokenize the land. They're going to integrate Palantir technology and build a surveillance state with US contractors. And so you need to persuade JP Morgan, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs that there is 100 times more profit. It's a bit like a shitcoin, right? Invest in my shitcoin and you can get 100x rather than the good stable Bitcoin. And so they have to create a scenario where BlackRock can go back, manage its portfolio and say, right, we're going to lose profits from Lockheed Martin, but we're going to get those rare earth minerals that will help our technology companies. And we'll get that loan, and we'll get another 2 trillion of bonds here. And that's what they're negotiating essentially. And the GCC is saying, right, I'll invest 1 trillion here if you allow us to have this military base taken away, and we enter into a 5-year agreement where we can harness our nuclear energy for artificial intelligence and build data centers. And they'll say, okay, well, we need to control this water resource. And if you don't let us have X%, then we'll just bomb it and we'll get Israel to bomb it. And we'll put that ISIS militia in there and destabilize the region. Now, it's not exactly how it works, but it works via these proxy relationships. And that's what you're witnessing right now. So they had to create an environment where the rebuild with BlackRock contractors is 100 times more profitable than the forever war. And because the West is overvalued in its stock market, it's looking for these high growth opportunities. And this is an experiment. Like, these countries have to get into bed with the devil. Like, they have to sell off some of their assets in order to buy some of their decolonial freedom. That could go wrong. Like, at any time, BlackRock could say, let's launch another covert, let's create a destabilization campaign through Lockheed Martin, and we'll fund it through USAID and all these NGOs and stuff. So it's a volatile environment. It's a new experiment. And then the technology side, I think that disrupts state power. Like, I think we're entering into a world that we're not going to recognize, put it that way. Like AI and robotics. I think the most important thing for us is we proved that we could create money we can own, money we can spend, and money that has a fixed supply on the largest world's distributed supercomputer with a network of nodes that back it up. I think we need to figure out how to do a similar thing with AI. identity, and we have a resistance against the centralizing power and centralizing forces. Because otherwise, only the rich Bitcoiners are going to be the ones that are able to liberate themselves. But everyone else is going to be on a universal basic income with Elon Musk's social credit score and Peter Thiel's Palantir technology. Or they're going to pick China with their equivalents. And that's what the world is kind of choosing right now. It's a very fascinating time. But Bitcoin, it's all about sovereign is the word. That's what everyone needs to build, and that's why people need to get into Bitcoin. It's a state of emergency. Own more Bitcoin every single month than the previous month. Decide whether you're going to pay your debt or buy Bitcoin. I can't make that decision for you. It has consequences. You need to decide what those consequences are. But everybody needs more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and you're running out of months to do it. I think we got a fair bit of time. I think we avoided World War III. World War III makes no financial sense for anybody. I don't think China will reunify with Taiwan. It makes no sense. It would destroy the financial markets. It would be a negotiation tactic, probably, but I don't think that's going to happen. Europe and Ukraine's over. Ukraine is going to be owned by Russia. I'm sorry. You are a complete victim of US corporate interest. Europe is being sacrificed. The immigration crisis was a destabilization campaign. And if you're not rich, you're going to be on a universal basic income. If you don't own assets, you're going to be getting poorer every month. The only assets you can own is US stocks, which are, from my perspective, making the proof of weapons network more powerful. Gold, hard to store, and Bitcoin. Your real estate is a shelter. It will probably continue to be pumped right till the end. But everyone needs to decide where they're going to live. They need to own more Bitcoin every month and this month. And they need to own assets. And those assets need to be in self-custody. And then we resist.
Wow. Do you think Core's push to increase the op return is an attempt to centralize Bitcoin? Since you've spoken about this battle between centralization and decentralization?
Yeah, so the way that I analyze the proximity of individual players to the proof of weapons network. So when Adam Back, someone I've got deep respect for, Cypherpunk, in the original white paper mentioned by Satoshi, but when he starts creating Bitcoin treasury companies, I know that he's going to be partnering with Howard Lutnick, the creator of Cantor Fitzgerald, Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor, that I believe was a part of Operation Chokepoint 2.0, deeply connected to the deep state. And if they're, if he's involved with these people like Jack Mallers is at 21, I mean, Tether, I'm a shareholder in over 100 different companies. I'm de-investing from all those companies. I did my part because I was an early investor in many of them, including Bitfinex and Coinbase and Kraken and Bitstamp and Bitfinex and Circle and many others. But as I've come over time, they've gone further and further away from the Bitcoin mission. So I'm trying to de-invest from them, but they're getting closer and closer to the proof of weapons network and the Wall Street side. And so I think, Bitcoin in self-custody is the thing. And anybody that is a core developer or part of core and also pushing a Bitcoin treasury company, I'm skeptical of. I'm not making an accusation because it's not even about character. You could be forced into an Epstein, a BlackRock, a Blockstream, an AXA, like a Cantor Fitzgerald. This is the mafia you're getting into bed with. Jack Mallers, you are in bed with the mafia. Like, you are in bed with mafia players. Charlie Kirk tried to exit the mafia. You don't exit the mafia once you're in bed with the mafia. And this is the mafia, the Cantor Fitzgeralds, the proof of weapons network. So once you're there, you're there. You know, so would it surprise me if BlackRock wanted to get as much Bitcoin in ETFs, become shareholders in as many Bitcoin treasury companies, fund as much of the developers and compromise as many of the developers as possible, and take as many mining companies public and become the main shareholder in those public Bitcoin mining companies. The biggest threat to Bitcoin right now is the US, because the proof of weapons network is hosted in the US, and the US is getting more mining, more public companies, more ETFs, more treasury companies, and they have developers. That is a big concern for me. And so if somebody is going to create a competing implementation whereby approximately 20% of node operators are running an alternative implementation, I encourage that, because I think we might need it one day. I'm not making I ideologically kind of agree with the argument of let's not change too much. But I'll just say it, Peter Todd, I mean, this is somebody that advocates for nuclear war. This is a staunch Zionist. This is somebody that has no Bitcoin. Ideologically couldn't be any further away from what I think Bitcoin is, and doesn't even have a stake in the game, and wanted to increase the number of Bitcoin and has radical ideas, and he's in the core development team. I think we need to hedge. So for me, it's all about protectionism, and making sure that we can hold core to account, because they know, just like I remember when ghash.io got like almost 50% of the mining pool, and then we had to all coordinate in order to make sure that everyone moves their miners to a different pool. And then they came down and they were tiny eventually. This is another, core is an attack on Bitcoin, and we need to know how we protect ourselves from core. It's not an attack on core from me. It is, I believe competition is good. And if we go through this experiment of really showing that we can put 20% of our nodes to knots, that's a good thing. That's an attack vector that Bitcoin has protected itself from. And I have no doubt that the largest, most powerful actors in the world will want as much control over Bitcoin as possible. And humans can be compromised, can be ransomed, can be blackmailed, can be forced to do things, even if they don't do it anyway. So that's an important thing for us to protect ourselves from.
Wow. So I guess we're kind of getting close to time here. Maybe one last question. Man, I don't really know which way to take it. I want to go back to the spiritual warfare thing you brought up earlier. Maybe you could just unpack that a bit for people. This is a lot, right? It's a lot for people to take in. It can be very doom and gloom. It can give you the overwhelming sense of pessimism about the present. Although I think, again, looking backward across history, I think we've, in general, moved towards the positive, right? Human civilization has gotten better over time,
despite all this chaos,
despite all of the intermittent chaos. And so I would hope that that trajectory would continue. Obviously, it's not guaranteed. We've had the dark ages and other setbacks, major setbacks. But if we're looking at that spiritual warfare dimension that you mentioned earlier, like what's there? What are the actions, like what for people to take into their lives, to consider, to participate? Obviously, we've said buying Bitcoin boycotts this system and gives you independence and enrichment. What else? What else should people be thinking about in terms of fighting for the good in this spiritual war?
Yeah, so I don't want to dictate, my personal beliefs, but I do believe we have a creator. And my personal belief is that we are on Earth for the afterlife. That's just my personal belief. And so life is a test. And you are faced with challenges. I don't believe those challenges get solved. Like life is a continual state of challenge after challenge. And I think life is a test for how you react under challenge. Do you go down an evil path? Do you go down a good path? What is your definition of good? Do you look for religious scriptures to define good? I'm not here to preach. I have my own, but I think when you are tested to the max, and I've done a lot of anti-war activism. It was kind of the reason I got into Bitcoin. Right back in the day, 2011, there was like a podcast called Bitcoin Not Bombs. Like when I went to the first Bitcoin conference, it was a resistance against, it was us versus the banks. We were cypherpunks, we were activists, we were taking on and allowing people to own their own money, and it was a mission of resistance. Personally, I believe that how you react and how you treat each other. I'd encourage everybody to ask yourself the question: are you tolerant of things? To me, I kind of, for the last 2 years, has been a massive eye opener for me, because I've been watching the Gaza genocide. And I always said to people, what we allow and tolerate is coming home. And the technology that was used in Gaza, genocide as a service, occupation as a service, surveillance as a service in UK, integration with drones in Ukraine. This is the same technology that was in the big, beautiful bill in order to implement border control. These are beta tests. And so we just had the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, Charlie Kirk, I'm sorry if this offends, advocated for an ideology that led to the death of many in the Middle East, in Gaza. And he tried to pull away from that ideology in his final weeks. And he had arguments with very powerful people as he was pulling away. And I believe that they took him out because he tried to pull away. Everyone will speculate on that. We'll never get the truth. We'll never get the truth. You'll always be left with speculation. But there is a cost to tolerating crimes against humanity to others and turning a blind eye. And so to me, I believe that we're on this earth in order to see humanity as humanity. And I think we're being tested. And I think the earth is an eternal struggle. And it's a test to find out, did you do good or did you do bad? And once you learn truth, and I've spent the last 25 years unlearning what they learned in my British education. But once you learn truth, do you stick to truth? Or do you tolerate something that you know is unacceptable? And I think that's the test. So I encourage people to say, there's been 20,000 shootings, gun shootings in America this year, but only one of them are we talking about now because he had 8 million followers. At the same time, for 2 years, he advocated for an ideology that's led to the death of hundreds of thousands. We need to question ourselves on what we're tolerating, and are we idol worshipping? Why, what is it that we're doing? And I think people need to ask themselves this question. And the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin was a blessing for me. It gave me financial independence I never imagined was possible. And I act like it could be taken away at any time if we don't think about what's best for what's collectively good for humanity at the moment. And I know that's a hard question and everyone will find their thing. But we do need to ask ourselves a question. 20,000 people were killed because, the proof of weapons network, inflation, drug addiction, homelessness, wealth inequality, All of these exist across the biggest economy in the world. We're fighting with each other. We are being driven to hate each other. The Democrats, the Republicans, the lefties, the LGBTQs, the Zios, the Muslims, the whatever. Like, you pick your poison. They're dividing and conquering us. We have to step above that. We have to really think, whose agenda am I serving by hating this person? And I'm telling you, you're serving the agenda of a surveillance state from the proof of weapons network that profits from manufacturing consent for taking away your human rights and replacing them with a surveillance state and a technocratic 1984 thing. Whichever side you end up on, it is a spiritual battle. And I believe that it's about trying to just take away as many of these divisive narratives that take us down these worst places of human behavior. So it's how we treat each other in the end, and what are we able to tolerate, and what are we not able to tolerate. And that's about all the wisdom I've got for you.
Thank you so much, man. This has been outstanding. Again, just you've taken themes that we constantly revisit on the show, and you've thoroughly unpacked them in just a very insightful way. So thank you so much.
Okay, appreciate you giving me a platform to talk about subjects that you know, and that's what we do have to be grateful for. I've never felt like I've been able to access more information to figure out what I think the truth is, and then be able to share that with as many people as possible. And that's a gift. That's definitely a blessing and a gift that we've never had before.
Indeed. Yeah, just great work, man. Really good. Hope people get something out of this. So where can people find you on the internet?
So I go live every week on YouTube, Simon Dixon, which is the Bitcoin Hard Talk. I got a podcast, and I break down everything that happened this week in Bitcoin for an hour, in macro for an hour, and then geopolitics for an hour, and connect all the themes together. I do that every single week to try and document all this history. And then I'm very active on X, and and I produce all my content on simondixon.com. I sold my business. Bitcoin's given me all the financial freedom that I need. I never went public, so I'm not in the public company agenda. I didn't take Silicon Valley money. So I'm as independent as I possibly can be. And Bitcoin gave me this gift. So I just try and help people with the information that I have. Sometimes it's very polarizing. Some people hate what I got to say, but I'm always open to the dialogue.
Beautiful.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. We lock our doors, we encrypt our hard drives, and we use strong passwords. But most people leave one thing wide open: their phone line. SIM swap attacks are one of the fastest growing methods of digital theft. In minutes, a hacker can clone your accounts, reset your passwords, and drain your life. Unfortunately, this is not science fiction. It happens every single day. Afani is the only mobile service protection designed exclusively to protect you from SIM swap attacks. Afani offers military-grade encryption on their product and offers up to $5 million of SIM swap insurance. And to date, there have been exactly 0 SIM swaps on any of Afani's over 50,000 protected accounts. So you don't need to live in fear, you just need to protect your weakest link. Go to afani.com/breedlove to secure your phone line today. Again, that's Afani, EFANI.com/breedlove. For the past 25 years, I've been reading roughly 1 book per week. Almost entirely difficult nonfiction books, the kind that really shift your thinking. Books on physics, money, power, psychology, spirituality, and philosophy. The real stuff. But I get it. Most people don't have time to read 50 books per year. So I hand selected my favorite nonfiction books and distilled each one of them into a course that you can take in 50 to 100 times faster than it would take you to read the entire book. Each course gives you the key insights, mental models, and frameworks that matter. We launched with 15 book courses, and we are building toward a library of 100 by the end of year 1. So if you are a seeker of truth, wisdom, and personal growth, then my book course is for you. To sign up, go to course.breedlove.io. Again, that's course.breedlove.io. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.